Hi, I'm Erica Lemke from the University of Missouri, and today I'm pleased to talk to you about our project, Project STAIR, an algebraic readiness project to examine the use of professional development in data-based individualization with middle school mathematics teachers. By the end of the session, we hope you'll understand more about DBI and critical features, including assessment and intervention strategies, and we'll be discussing implications and next steps. I'm here today as a representative for Project STAIR, but my colleagues have been, of course, very involved in this project. Dr. Sarah Powell from University of Texas and Dr. Leanne Ketterlin-Geller from Southern Methodist University. Project STAIR, funded by the Office of Special Education Programs, is a model demonstration project. We're in our final year of funding, and again, as I mentioned, 3 sites involved in this work. So let me tell you more about Project STAIR, supporting teaching of algebra, individual readiness. Project STAIR is meant to provide an intensive intervention process to middle school students who are struggling in mathematics. The goal of Project STAIR is to help teachers who have students at risk to help them prepare for Algebra 1. Project STAIR relies on a data-based individualization model, and in that DBI model, we want systematic processes, a reliance on data that will help teachers to individualize instruction. We use the DBI model that's from the National Center on Intensive Intervention, or NCII, which you can see depicted here. And there are 2 primary components, assessment and instruction. The key components of that DBI model include a validated Tier 2 support program that's already in place, progress monitoring, including goal setting, frequent assessment, utilizing decision rules in database decision making, diagnostic data that's collected and applied to determine what skills are not successful for a particular student, and then instructional changes that are based on the weekly progress monitoring data that's collected. Finally, this cycle of DBI is continued, determining if students are responsive or not responsive to the intervention that's being provided. DBI has been more common at the elementary level, but this particular project, we're using it in middle school mathematics. So here's that model again, and let's look at what it looks like on the teacher side. On the left-hand side of this slide, you see what it looks like for the students. On the right-hand side, we see what it looks like for teachers. So when we're providing professional development, first we're thinking of intensive information or more detailed information that we can provide to some teachers. But also, there may be teachers who need just a sort of refined set of data, who may not need quite as much information, or may need booster sessions. And for that, we call this part our STAIR tailored information. So within this model, on the left-hand side, we're seeing, again, that model for students. On the right-hand side, we're thinking about what does this model look like in terms of teacher professional development. Instead of diagnostic data for our teachers, we're using coaching to help really target their particular needs. So for our project, Project STAIR, we provide first DBI, intensive professional development. We help teachers and work with teachers to determine students that might be eligible for DBI. We work with teachers to collect some progress monitoring data and diagnostic data. And then we go back in and teach teachers a little bit more about data utilization and intervention design. And finally, coaches work with teachers to help interpret data, to change instruction as part of that tailored PD. I mentioned assessments. We have diagnostic assessments that are part of the Diagnostic Online Math Assessment, or DOMA. And you can see some examples of those represented here. I'm sorry. There are some examples of those assessments on the previous slide. We also use progress monitoring in algebra, those algebra readiness progress measures, including proportional reasoning, quantity discrimination. So students are asked to complete these computerized assessments weekly. That data is graphed for teachers, and they look at and utilize the data using decision rules as prompted by their coaches to really take a look at what's working well for a student and also what's not working. From that, adjustments are made in instruction, instruction might be changed, or an intervention might be implemented. What types of interventions are we using? We're using those evidence-based strategies or techniques in middle school mathematics. So we have an initial instructional platform, including items like explicit instruction, multiple representations, precise language, but also fluency building, problem solving, and motivation. And as we look down through these particular components, we're thinking about those common or sort of key pieces, including explicit instruction, multiple representations. You can see those kind of further drilled down in this particular slide, where on the left-hand side we see those common components of explicit instruction. On the right-hand side, that concrete, abstract, pictorial, sometimes we say concrete representational abstract, as part of multiple representations. So we're using these common evidence-based strategies to help support teachers in supporting their students at risk. Then we're thinking about, if those particular strategies are not working for students, how can we make adaptations? For instance, intensifying instruction through some of these intensification strategies, and these might look familiar to you. This is part of the taxonomy of intensification, Amelia Malone, Lynn Fuchs's work around intensification. And our tailored approach, following some initial core professional development, some follow-up tailored professional development is provided through YouTube videos that we've recorded in our Lightboard studio. We have over 100 tailored PD videos that really take you into some of those mathematical concepts, that take you into areas like equity in mathematics. And in a minute, I'll give you more details about how you can access those videos on YouTube. So our pilot study was conducted in our first couple of years in the project. You can read more about the details of this pilot study in a recent article we published in Studies in Educational Evaluation. The research questions for the project revolved around how participation in the project might impact teachers' perception of school-level culture and climate for DBI, how it might impact teachers' ratings of importance, understanding, confidence, frequency of DBI content, instructional and assessment practices, and then also what the student level effects were following teacher participation. In this pilot study year, we had 22 teachers. Schools were across Texas and Missouri, and from those teachers, we had 56 students who worked with those teachers. All of these students were in need of intensive intervention in mathematics. We used both teacher and student measures. The teacher measures included surveys on self-efficacy, instructional practices. Student measures included some of those measures I showed you before, the algebra readiness progress measure, the diagnostic online math assessment, and also a standardized measure, the Iowa algebra test. So what were some of our outcomes? One significant outcome was with respect to culture and climate, the impact on culture and climate. The difference between pre and post-test was significant for teachers who were participating in our DBI professional development. Also, we didn't see necessarily significant changes, but we did see important differences in pre to post assessment practices in terms of teachers' ratings of importance, understanding, confidence, and frequency. While changes were not significant across some of these survey items, it was important that we were examining the pre to post test potential differences. These particular questions were addressing efficacy in mathematics. Again, we need more data to support potential changes in efficacy based on involvement in our project. We did see significant changes on student outcomes in terms of some of the algebra readiness measures, all of the number properties, quantity discrim, proportional reasoning. We also saw some pretty significant effects, particularly on quantity discrimination. On our standardized measure, the Iowa, we did not see significant changes from pre to post. So teachers, as a result of participation in STAIR during our pilot study, showed significant increases in their perceptions of culture and climate at their school, significant growth in understanding of and perceptions of importance, confidence in using assessment data. Unfortunately, no significant differences in perceptions and use of DBI content, instructional practices, or self-efficacy. So really kind of some mixed findings around those teacher results. For students, we did see that we saw some positive changes in improving outcomes on proximal measures and diagnostic measures, but not that distal standardized measure. As we think about moving forward for the future, we need to continue to think about strategies for implementation. So do we need more direct measures, for instance, of things like, direct measures of multiple representations, direct measures of fluency, for instance. Do we need additional strategies to support teachers' implementation of DBI? How can we build confidence in DBI, for instance, through targeting DBI support more explicitly during coaching? Perhaps we need more sensitive measures of how teachers might be improving in DBI. One of the further implications for practice is to continue to consider how we support teachers as they move from this pandemic and move back into in-person learning in some cases. There may be, or likely be continued achievement crises. And so how do we support teachers with our DBI framework? In addition, we continue to think about how do we use that professional development to improve some of those teacher outcomes. As we move into future steps, we plan to move into 21-22 with full implementation. We're going to implement a randomized control trial with intensified professional development and more structured coaching sessions to really try to do a final great test using that RCT design. Just some kind of final reflections as we move into our final year of this project. It's really important that we've tried out this DBI model in middle school mathematics. It's an area that there was definite need. However, it's been difficult to sustain this with teachers. We are doing some sustainability follow-ups in these years after implementation. So, a question remains about how to make this more easy and accessible. And we want to continue to help think through how we teach for transfer, how we communicate that to our teachers. So here's a QR code. If you're interested in more of our videos, you can certainly just search Project STAIR on YouTube or use the QR code to go directly to that YouTube channel. So I want to thank you again. I know this looks a little messy here, but these are all of the folks who support our work, including the Meadows Center, NCII, and encourage you to follow us also on Twitter using @ProjectSTAIR. So I appreciate your time and thank you again for the opportunity to present.
Hi, and welcome to part 2 of the coaching breakout session. My name is Kathleen Fannensteel, and I am with American Institutes for Research. And very similar to Erica, I too will be talking about our model demonstration project, Project Tips for AR. So TIPS for AR stands for Teacher Instructional Practices for Algebraic Readiness. We are currently in our year 4 of this model demonstration funded through OSEP. And we have been working with some middle school teachers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we had to pivot this year, really about the project and our lessons learned. So overall, our project goals, and this is how we've attacked each year, was to develop, test, revise, and disseminate a suite of professional development modules in the use of, and these are 3 specific evidence-based practices. So the use of multiple representations, asking inquiry-based questions, and then student engagement. So really building upon student discourse, but also understanding that we need to build conceptual understanding and give students tasks that lead to discussion, as well as lead to greater understanding. The other big project goal is just to build capacity of general ed and special educators to meet the needs of students with disabilities. And so what we've been finding is that it's not that they don't know how to teach math, but how do we truly build their own understanding and their capacity? Like many of you, I know some of the tricks. I was a former special educator, and really looking at how do we build conceptual understanding, moving beyond the tricks and actually teaching high quality ways of doing math so that students understand it, which leads us to our third project goal, was to increase students' algebraic readiness skills specific to grades 6 through 8. As the National Mathematics Advisory Panel back in 2008 stated, algebra is the gateway. That's the key to long-term math success. But many of our students are entering 9th grade without the skills to be successful in algebra. And it often comes back to they lack that conceptual understanding of the mathematics. So as I mentioned, we are in year 4 of a model demonstration, again, focused at the middle school. And so our pre-COVID activities included professional development. As you can see, that's why we wanted to develop a suite of materials so that schools could pick that up and use it in their own school or district. We also provided coaching. So in year 1 with our cohorts, we had intensive coaching. So both virtual as well as in person, 2, sometimes 4 times a month. Year 2 was more targeted. So this was strictly twice a month, 1 in person and 1 virtual. And then year 3 is more of a request, meaning, hey, how's your new unit going? Do you need some support? Sometimes coaching is not just in the classroom. It could be involved with modeling, building that that relationship so that the teachers do feel comfortable. Hey, I need some help. As you can see, we've been working in middle school. We had 2 cohorts, and our cohorts consisted of math teachers, special educators, as well as interventionists. And I really like this quote because I feel like this is where we've been at the last year, school year. Every time you fail, you get a piece of the answer as to how to succeed. Pivot. Pivot has been the word of the last year, year and a half. As you can imagine, we could not keep doing what we were doing with the classroom teachers. We were doing in-person PD. We were there to coach in person, and coaching in person involves some modeling. We often did some team teaching with the teachers. Sometimes we would fill small groups of students so that the teacher could really see, how do we get to that root, right? That foundation to build those skills. How do we apply the scaffold so that all students can be successful? And it was working. And I don't want to say we failed, but we were like, oh, now what do we do? The schools we were working with, it was all from the same district in Central Texas. They started virtual. The teachers remain virtual until the end of November. So even if students chose to go back to in person, the students were in front of a computer with the teachers often still at home teaching virtually. Many of their lessons consisted more of almost like a flipped classroom. They would do a quick 10-minute lecture or lesson, and then the students worked. Many of the students, if they were in person, weren't getting the support. If they were at home, they may be getting the support, but it was really on an as needed basis. And we were like, okay, so now what do we do? So we had to revise. So we are still working on creating, testing, revising, disseminating the suite of professional development modules. We're still focused on those evidence-based practices, but we've now layered this within a book study. And we're using the Math Pact, Achieving Instructional Coherence Within and Across Grade Levels by Sarah Bush, Karen Karp, and Barbara Dougherty. And we're using this as a way to kind of embed it within professional development. So previously we were in person. We were doing a lot of, all right, let's try this problem out. What are we going to learn? Where are your students going to struggle? And we try to figure out how can we do that in a virtual setting. And we were able to, but we wanted that learning to continue between the sessions. And that's where we layered in this book study. So as you can see, our second bullet remained the same. We still want to build capacity of general and special educators. But the difference is that we layered through this book, but we also added a lesson study. As you can imagine, when we were in person as well as virtual coaching, we really got to know the teachers. That's kind of the rule number one of coaching, is to build that relationship. And so we really got into, let's look at your lessons. Where can we improve on them? Where can we embed more use of multiple representations? How can we get student engagement? How can we increase that discourse? And so we were in a virtual setting. We recruited from teachers, and you'll see on the next slide, we had a lot of states. So how do we get into that, recreate that coaching of, hey, that lesson went well, what if you try this next time? And so we did the book study coupled with a lesson study. And then we added virtual coaching, but it wasn't coaching in the sense of the researchers providing the coaching, it was peer-to-peer coaching. And then of course, increased students' algebraic readiness. Not that we are still like not hoping for that, we just no longer are collecting data in that same way as a result of kids moving in and out of in-person or virtual or hybrid models. And so we talked to the teachers. There was a reflection piece, is the lesson study of how well do you think the kids are doing, but we didn't actually collect data. So that brings me to our book and lesson study. As I mentioned, we are reading the Math Pact. We had a spring cohort, all middle school. We had 14 different states represented. We initially were hoping for, if we could just aim to get 20 teachers. Well, we had over 200 apply. By the time we randomized, and it was just strictly, let's randomize who can participate, based on our own capacity of the research team. And so across those 14 states, we had about 60 teachers. We started with 62. A couple had to drop just because, hey, we all know this last spring was a little crazy. And so we ended up with about 54 teachers. We had core math teachers from grades 6, 7, and 8. We had special educators. We had interventionists. And then we even had 2 speech and language pathologists. We met virtually twice a month, started in January, and we just finished up this last June. And they completed 2 complete lesson study cycles, meaning they wrote a lesson, they exchanged it with their peer partner for some feedback, they taught, and then they actually did some virtual coaching. So they did 2 lesson studies, but then they wrote 3 lessons. That third lesson is actually going to be reviewed as part of a mini lesson study this summer. And then, of course, they had peer coaching. So when we think about coaching, this was really our cycle that we went to. So first, we wanted them to reflect. How are you currently doing? Thinking about especially those evidence-based practices. How well are you integrating multiple representations? How well are you using data? If I went into your classroom, how engaged are the students? The teachers had to complete a pre-math inventory that included both statements that they had to rate themselves, but it also included math problems. As I mentioned, I wasn't necessarily taught the conceptual. I myself was taught, here's how to solve it. And so I had to relearn over the years. And so we also went through, okay, how would you solve this? As well as, all right, here's some student work. What are the misconceptions? Where did the student struggle? How would you remediate? And that was part of that initial kind of data collection of where are we starting from? What's your own baseline? So it's quite a bit of self-reflection. Based on that, they then had to set a coaching goal. What is it that you want to get out of this book and lesson study? What is it that you truly want to improve on in your own teaching? And then we had the learn cycle. That's where the book study came in. So they read chapters. We also read journal articles. So really trying to link that research to practice, close that gap. Quite a bit of breakout rooms, learning from one another. And then they actually had to teach. And so they had to record themselves teaching and look at some kind of data collection. Again, we weren't collecting the student data. So it's not like the teachers were uploading the student data, but it was more of how well do you think your students did? Did you have some kind of formative assessment, guided practice, independent practice in your lesson? And then this is where we also had the coaching. And so we uploaded to Go React, and they were assigned either one partner, sometimes 2 partners. For example, the speech and language pathologist didn't have a classroom. So those SLPs coached 2 teachers and really looking at, wow, this worked. How do you think you could increase engagement here? And then there was a reflection. So the same way we would do in-person coaching of, okay, I'm going to meet with you. What's your coaching goal? Okay, I'm going to observe. And then we're going to reflect together. That's what the teachers did in this virtual setting. And then, of course, part of that reflection, and then we set the cycle all over again. So when we think through this, we really looked at, okay, well, what were the lesson study components? One, we had a template so that everybody had the same material. They had to write the lesson. Then they taught and recorded. And then, of course, they did that coaching piece. So they were learning through the book, as well as these mini professional development sessions. As I mentioned, we met twice a month. And so they still learned from one another. It was a very engaging virtual session, meaning we had some small groups. We utilized Jamboard, we utilized Nearpod, some polling features in Zoom, so that they could really learn from one another. They also then had to have this partner. And what was great is that it didn't matter what state you were in. It didn't matter what your standards were. These were middle school teachers really coming together. And if you've ever looked at the standards, if you're Common Core or your own state, they often mirror each other. And then we just did a preliminary. So they did the post assessment, which we're still analyzing, but then we just had overall how did the book study go? All the participants rated the book study as very useful and relevant. When we asked specifically about the quality, majority said very good or excellent. And then these are individual, there was an open-ended question. What was the best part? And I loved these responses. Collaborating with other teachers, providing and receiving feedback, ability to analyze my own teaching. How often do we not get a chance to do that? I never recorded myself as a teacher. This lesson study and that reflection piece really caused or forced the teachers to, okay, here's my coaching responses, but how do I think I did? To think about it as a sports analogy, how often do we hear about football players or basketball players watching video afterwards and really like, oh, I thought that was the right play, but here's where I messed up. So as teachers, it really forced them to, wow, that part of the lesson went well, or, oh, I should have inserted a question here, or I needed to let the students do a little bit more talking. Um, Many of the teachers also, this monthly discussion, the sharing of ideas and resources. I love this one, communicating with other professionals outside my field. And then the best, watching real classrooms and the challenges that are part of teaching middle school math. There's great videos out there, but we all know that even if it's a real teacher and real students, if you're being recorded, there's often, okay, let's pause. All right, let's do that piece again, because you're trying to capture the essence of that teaching. This lesson study was raw. There was no editing. It was as if you walked into that classroom and said, hey, let me watch you and learn from you. And that's one thing quite a bit of the teachers had mentioned, is that it was just so nice that I'm not the only one that struggles. So what are our next steps? We have a summer cohort going on right now. As I mentioned, all the teachers wrote 3 lessons. So they had to teach 2. That third lesson, we're actually using a rubric to review. And then the teachers this summer, we have teachers as well as quite a bit of instructional coaches. We are going to edit those lessons to make sure they include those evidence-based practices and that they truly are a lesson that a teacher could pick up and use in their classroom. We're also hoping to hold a fall cohort. Again, it will be the book and the lesson study. Some of the coaches, everyone's going to be required to write 1 lesson. So that 1 lesson will be tried out with the fall cohort, as well as new lessons. And the overarching goal is that we will have free lessons that contain evidence-based practices written by teachers, tested out by teachers, and revised by teachers and coaches, made publicly available for pre-service teachers and current teachers to use. And that's where we are at. So thank you again. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you.